The chilling truth often hides not in the shadows of strangers, but in the familiar eyes of those we trust most. My name is Liam Anderson, and at 34, I resided in a high-end condo in Denver, a fortress of solitude bought with the spoils of a tech empire. A year prior, I had finalized the sale of my startup for a staggering $5 million, a sum that effectively guaranteed financial security for the remainder of my days, freeing me from the necessity of ever working again. With $5 million secured in the bank and no marital or parental responsibilities, my life should have been the epitome of success. But it wasn't. A dark stain marred this otherwise perfect picture: my relationship with my father, Arthur Anderson. He had once been a notable figure in the real estate world, known for his aggressive deals and sharp negotiation tactics. But a string of unsuccessful, ill-advised ventures had slowly transformed him. The charm he once possessed had curdled into a cynical, manipulative veneer, a thin disguise for a man consumed by bitterness and a gnawing sense of entitlement. His control wasn't over my life choices, those he largely ignored, but rather my finances. In his view, I was less of a son and more of a mobile bank account, a limitless reservoir of funds he felt was rightfully his, despite never contributing to its creation. This morning, while staring at my reflection, I straightened the collar of my forest green dress shirt, a favorite of my mother's, chosen specifically to evoke a sense of comfort for her. Today marked her birthday, an occasion that traditionally brought the entire family together at the ancestral home in the outskirts of Portland, a grand, two-story wooden house that now felt more like a tomb of unspoken resentments than a cherished family dwelling. I took a deep, steadying breath, attempting to dispel the familiar sense of dread that accompanied the thought of confronting my father. He was a man who had never offered a hug, never inquired about my well-being beyond a perfunctory nod, and whose gaze only ever registered me as a human vault. Truthfully, this was a significant improvement from my childhood. He was a heavy drinker then, and his drunken rages often culminated in him dragging me out, sometimes late at night, for a beating, without reason or warning, simply to vent his frustrations. Those memories are scarred into my very being, wounds that reopened with every encounter, every cold glance. My Audi Q8 glided down the tree-lined streets, the afternoon sun dappling the windshield through the tall, ancient oaks. I switched on the radio, hoping the vibrant pop music would silence the cacophony of anxious thoughts in my head, but the unease persisted, a low hum beneath the cheerful melody. Upon reaching the familiar two-story wooden house, its porch wrapped in blooming wisteria, I saw my mother already waiting by the door, her smile as luminous as the sun, a beacon in the gathering shadows of my dread. "Liam, you made it," she said, her voice laced with genuine delight, embracing me warmly. The comforting scent of her lavender perfume, a scent intrinsically linked to my earliest, safest memories, acted as a balm, soothing some of my internal turmoil, if only for a fleeting moment. The celebration was held in the expansive backyard garden, meticulously maintained by my mother. Decorative lanterns were strung up between the ancient apple trees, casting a soft, golden glow as dusk began to settle. Cheerful laughter blended with the mellow tones of jazz emanating from a portable speaker, creating an idyllic scene that felt utterly at odds with the tension coiling in my gut. My mother, Helen, was undeniably the heart of the gathering. At 60, she still possessed a timeless grace, her silver hair styled in an elegant updo, and her warm, brown eyes twinkling with an infectious warmth as she flitted from guest to guest. I watched her from a distance, filled with gratitude that she remained my constant, my anchor in a world that often felt unstable and unpredictable. My father, predictably, was positioned in a corner of the garden, a glass of dark red wine in hand, his icy stare sweeping across the attendees like a predator surveying its domain. He was dressed in a pristine gray suit, impeccably tailored, and still cut a distinguished, if intimidating, figure, but his rare, forced smile invariably sent a shiver down my spine. I did my best to steer clear of him, engaging in animated conversation with various relatives, Aunt Clara's endless anecdotes, Uncle Paul's booming laugh, yet I couldn't escape the sensation of his eyes tracking my every move, a silent, predatory assessment. Liam, my father's voice, sharp and cutting, sliced through the air as I was helping myself to a piece of my mother's famous lemon poppy seed cake from the buffet table. I turned to find him approaching, holding a second glass, its contents shimmering like fresh blood in the candlelight from the nearby lanterns. "Have a drink with your father, son. A special glass, just for you." He stressed the word special, drawing it out, and his thin, knowing smirk filled me with an immediate, deep unease. My instinct screamed at me, but I couldn't articulate why. I accepted the glass, my fingers clenching it tightly, the cool glass feeling heavy and ominous in my hand. "Thank you, Father," I replied, striving to keep my voice even, refusing to let my apprehension show. My mother was nearby, sharing a laugh with Aunt Clara, her back turned to us. I didn't want to cause any scene that might alarm her, not on her special day. I lifted the glass and took a sip. The wine was full-bodied with a slightly bitter note, an unexpected metallic tang on my tongue, but otherwise seemed unremarkable. I glanced at my father, who gave me a slight nod, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, as if a covert mission had just been accomplished. Mere minutes later, a strange, creeping coldness began to spread through my limbs, and my head began to swim. The vibrant colors of the garden blurred into an indistinct swirl, and the cheerful sounds of the party became muffled, as if coming from a great distance, heard through a thick pane of glass. My heart began to race, a frantic drum against my ribs, and my breathing grew shallow, like the very air was being stolen from my lungs, leaving me gasping for each inadequate breath. A wave of intense nausea washed over me, and my knees buckled. "Mom," I managed to whisper, the word barely a gasp, trying to move toward her, but my legs refused to cooperate, feeling like leaden weights. I stumbled, desperately trying to regain my balance, but the world tilted violently, and the wine glass slipped from my grasp, shattering with a sharp, sickening crunch on the perfectly manicured lawn. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was my father's unchanging, cold smile. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on the old, familiar bed in an upstairs guest room, the same one I'd occupied as a child during family visits. My head was pounding with a relentless, rhythmic throb, and my body felt utterly depleted of energy, as if every ounce of vitality had been siphoned out of me. My mother was seated beside me, her hands gripping mine, her eyes puffy and red, betraying recent tears. "Liam, are you all right?" "Oh, my goodness, I was so terrified." Her voice was shaky, raw with emotion, as if she had just endured a harrowing ordeal herself. "What happened?" I murmured, my voice raspy, attempting to reconstruct the scattered fragments of events. The vivid memory of the wine glass, my father's unsettling smile, and the overwhelming dizziness washed over me, a terrifying flash. I looked to my mother, seeking an explanation in her eyes, but she just shook her head slowly, stroking my hair in the comforting way she did when I was a boy, a gesture of profound tenderness that now felt heartbreakingly inadequate. "You fainted in the garden," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father claimed you had too much to drink, but I know better. You only had that one glass, didn't you?" Her gaze was filled with a deep, maternal concern that pierced through my confusion. I nodded, my throat parched. One glass. Just one glass of wine given to me by my father. I squeezed my mother's hand, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers, a silent testament to her fear. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the antique wall clock, each second stretching into an eternity. I wanted to reassure her, but I was lost in my own sea of doubt and burgeoning suspicion. That glass of wine, my father's cold smirk, and the sensation of my life force draining away. They were all pieces of a terrifying puzzle I couldn't yet assemble, but the implications were beginning to form a chilling shape. "Liam, I'm so worried," my mother said, her voice dropping to an even lower whisper, as if she feared being overheard, even in the quiet solitude of the room. She rose and walked to the window, gazing down at the exact spot in the garden where I had collapsed, a faint indentation still visible in the lawn. "What you experienced, the dizziness, the trouble breathing, losing consciousness. I've seen it before. It was just like my father." I froze, my heart thumping against my ribs with a sudden, painful jolt. "Grandfather?" I asked, my voice thin, barely audible. I had only vague childhood memories of him. A large man with a resonant laugh, a distant, kindly presence. My mother had always said he died unexpectedly from a heart attack when she was young, a tragic but seemingly natural event. She turned back to face me, her eyes red, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Yes, my father. He collapsed in the same way, after an evening drinking with friends. He was a healthy man, Liam, just like you. No prior conditions, no warning. But the next morning, he never woke up." Her voice quivered, each word a painful excavation from a long-buried memory, finally dragged into the light. I got up and went to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, feeling the fragile tension in her body. "Mom, I don't believe this was an illness." I was hesitant to articulate the terrifying suspicion forming in my mind, but the blend of fear and a desperate, fragile hope in her eyes urged me on. "You know, I get regular physicals. My heart, my blood work, everything is perfectly fine. There are no signs of any hereditary issues that would cause something like this." She looked at me, her eyes widening with a horrifying new understanding, a dawning realization that mirrored my own. "Then, what do you believe happened?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, as if speaking aloud would make it irrevocably real. I took a deep breath, feeling as if I were teetering on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss. "Mom, I think something was wrong with the wine Dad gave me." The words hung heavy and cold in the air between us. I saw her recoil, her hand flying to her mouth as her face went bone pale. "Liam, what are you suggesting?" "Arthur is your father." Her voice was laced with anguish, a desperate plea for normalcy, but I could clearly see a flicker of deep uncertainty in her eyes, battling with her denial. "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil within me. "But didn't you find it strange how he kept insisting that glass was special? I drank from it, and then I collapsed. I wasn't drunk, Mom. I had a single sip, barely enough to coat my tongue." I paused, looking her directly in the eye, pressing the point. "You thought it was strange too, didn't you? Dad said I was drunk, but you knew that wasn't true." My mother sank into a nearby armchair, her trembling hands wrapping around a cold teacup, seeking comfort in its warmth. She remained silent for a long moment, but I could clearly see the internal war raging within her, her decades-long loyalty to my father battling fiercely against her primal, protective maternal instincts. I don't want to believe it," she finally said, her voice cracking, barely audible. "But you're right. I did find it odd. Your father was so insistent you were intoxicated, so dismissive, But I looked at you, and I knew you weren't. We sat in silence, two lost souls caught in an unforeseen storm, linked by a terrible, unspoken suspicion. I took her hand and squeezed it, offering silent support. Mom, I'm going to find out what happened. I don't want to suspect Dad, but I have to know the truth. She nodded, her eyes welling with fresh tears, reflecting the lanterns from the garden below. Be careful, Liam. If what you're saying is true, I won't let anyone harm you. As I left the house, the night air cool on my face, I felt a strange mix of relief and burden. My mother, at least partially, believed me, validating my terrifying intuition. But the suspicion I held about my father, even as a mere thought, felt like a fracture in the very foundation of our family, irreparable and profound. I drove home, my determination burning like a cold, relentless fire. I would uncover the truth, no matter how horrifying it proved to be. After that conversation with my mother, I felt as if I were navigating a tightrope, every step fraught with peril. The suspicion about my father was a constant, clinging shadow, yet I had no concrete evidence, only the memory of the wine, his chilling smile, and the visceral certainty that I had narrowly cheated death. I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself it was a product of my imagination, a consequence of past trauma, but my own reflection in the mirror showed the eyes of someone who could not let it rest, haunted by the specter of what almost happened. November's crisp chill ushered in Thanksgiving. My mother's call came, her tone soft yet infused with optimism, a desperate plea for a semblance of normalcy. Liam, please come for dinner. Just for one evening. Your father has been asking for you. My instinct was to decline, to keep my distance from that house now cloaked in a sense of foreboding, its pleasant exterior belying the darkness within. But I couldn't bring myself to disappoint her, to add to her quiet despair. I'll be there, I replied, my own words feeling like a weight in my chest, a commitment to face the very source of my torment. The old house was bathed in the dim light of dusk when I arrived, with warm glows from the windows spilling onto the meticulously raked lawn. As I entered, the familiar aroma of roast turkey, sage stuffing, and pumpkin pie filled the air, a nostalgic scent that did little to warm the chill inside me. My mother hugged me, her smile as radiant as ever, but I could see the faint lines of worry she tried to conceal around her eyes, a silent plea for peace. My father was already seated at the head of the dining table, a glass of his omnipresent red wine in hand, his gray suit perfectly pressed, his silver hair neatly combed. He looked up at me, his smirk as sharp and unsettling as ever. Liam, feeling better after your little tumble in the garden? His voice was smooth, deceptively casual, but I detected the unmistakable undercurrent of derision, a cruel jab. I took my seat across from him, projecting an air of calm, a carefully constructed mask. I'm fine, Father. Thank you. Enjoying the break from work. Beneath the elegant linen tablecloth, however, my hands were clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms, a desperate attempt to ground myself. My mother moved around the room, bringing out platters of perfectly roasted food and chattering with Aunt Clara about recipes. But my attention was fixed entirely on my father. His gaze shadowed me, like a predator tracking its quarry, a silent conversation between us that no one else could hear. When a main course was ready, steam rising deliciously from the platters, my father rose, lifting his glass, commanding attention. A toast, he declared, his voice resonating through the dining room. To family, and to Thanksgiving. His eyes, cold and unwavering, locked onto mine, a direct challenge. He then reached for a pre-poured glass of red wine, its contents gleaming like fresh blood in the candlelight, and extended it to me. Drink, Liam. This one is special. That word, special, echoed the night of my mother's birthday, sending a fresh jolt of terror through me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of warning. Every survival instinct screamed at me. I would not let history repeat itself. I accepted the glass, my fingers trembling ever so slightly, a tremor I hoped no one else noticed. My mother was momentarily distracted, in the kitchen getting dessert, her back to us. My father watched me, his expression a clear challenge, an expectation that I would comply. In that split second, a surge of adrenaline sharpened my focus. I knew what I had to do. I feigned dropping my linen napkin from my lap, a simple, natural movement. As I bent to retrieve it, in one fluid, heart-stopping motion, my hand shot out, and I seamlessly switched my glass with his on the table, placing his wine where mine had been and pulling my own, now his close. The maneuver was instantaneous, lost in the casual flow of the evening, a magician's trick performed under immense pressure. I straightened up, my heart thundering in my ears, a bead of sweat tracing a path down my temple. But my expression remained neutral. My father, oblivious, raised his glass, the one intended for me, and took a generous swallow before turning to speak with Uncle Paul, his attention shifting. I held his glass, now mine, but did not drink. I simply watched and I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Nothing. The conversation around the table flowed, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of cutlery. I began to wonder if I was just being paranoid, if my mind was playing cruel tricks on me. But then, after about 45 minutes, my father stopped talking mid-sentence, a strange, choked sound escaping his throat. He grabbed at his chest, his breathing becoming ragged and labored, his face contorting in pain. "Arthur, what's wrong?" my mother cried out, rushing to his side, her voice laced with immediate alarm. He staggered, swaying dangerously, the wine glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the polished hardwood floor, the crimson liquid splashing across the pristine rug. He clutched his head, his face turning a ghastly shade of white, and then, with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the sudden silence of the room, he collapsed. My mother's scream pierced the air, sharp and guttural. The dinner table descended into chaos as Aunt Clara frantically dialed for an ambulance, her fingers fumbling with the phone. I sprang to my feet, not from fear, but from the horrifying clarity that was washing over me, cold and absolute. Dizziness, shortness of breath, fainting, just like me at my mother's party, just as my mother had described my grandfather. "Call an ambulance now," I yelled, but my eyes remained fixed on my father. He lay on the floor, his breathing shallow, his glassy eyes staring up at me, unfocused. In that instant, as his gaze met mine, I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his expression, a fleeting moment of horrifying recognition, as if he understood precisely what he had just ingested and the terrible irony of his fate. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights flashing eerily through the windows, casting a macabre glow over the house. They quickly assessed my father, lifting him onto a stretcher and transporting him to the hospital, the siren's wail fading into the distance. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, her hand clutching mine, her body trembling. "Liam, what is happening? Why is this happening?" She looked utterly lost, her world shattering around her. I held her close, trying to offer comfort, but my own mind was spinning, a whirlwind of shock, fear, and a grim satisfaction. If I hadn't switched the glasses, I would be the one on that gurney, or worse. The thought was a knife twisting in my gut, a chilling confirmation of his intent. "Mom, I need to get a sample of the wine from that shattered glass," I whispered, my voice urgent, hushed. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror, but she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was, connecting the dots that pointed to an unthinkable truth. After everyone else had gone, and the house had returned to an eerie quiet, I carefully collected a sample of the wine residue from the polished hardwood floor where my father's glass had shattered, the very glass he had meant for me. I used a small, sterile dropper and sealed it in a tiny vial, securing it safely in my pocket. That night, sleep was impossible. The image of my father collapsing, the look of dawning terror in his eyes, and the dark red wine replayed in my mind. An endless, horrifying loop. I had been right. My father had tried to kill me, and now I was going to prove it. In the days after Thanksgiving, I felt like a fugitive, not from the law, but from my own terrifying thoughts. The vivid vision of my father's collapse, the stark panic in his eyes, and the small vial of wine tucked securely in my coat pocket were my constant companions. Every night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling of my silent condo, questioning whether I was losing my sanity or if I had genuinely escaped a cold, calculated murder attempt by my own father. But I knew I had to press forward. I needed the truth, no matter the devastating cost to our already fractured family. I reached out to a private laboratory in Portland, a discreet facility recommended by contact from my tech background, known for their forensic capabilities. Sending the sample by mail felt far too risky, a betrayal of the urgency I felt. So I drove there myself, the vial feeling like a miniature bomb in my pocket, its contents capable of obliterating everything I knew. The technician, a woman in her 50s with thick-rimmed glasses and an air of quiet efficiency, gave me a curious but professional look as I presented the vial, explaining little. "I need this tested for anything out of the ordinary," I said, my voice more stable than I felt, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. "As quickly as you can, please." She nodded, asking no further questions, sensing the unspoken gravity of the situation. 3 days, she stated, her voice clipped and businesslike. Those 3 days stretched into an eternity of nervous anticipation. I went back to my condo, locked the doors, and kept the curtains drawn, as if I expected my father to materialize at any moment, seeking to finish what he started. My mother called daily, her voice thin and strained with worry. "Liam, your father is more stable, but still weak. The hospital says he went into some kind of shock, but they can't determine the cause. Do you know anything?" I could hear the suspicion now, a faint, lingering question in her tone, but I couldn't yet tell her everything, not until I had undeniable proof. "I'm looking into it, Mom. Try not to worry." But I was the one consumed with worry, haunted by the endless possibilities. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was the lab. "Mr. Anderson, we have your results. You should come in." Her tone was clinical and professional, yet I could sense the underlying seriousness, an almost imperceptible tremor of gravity in her voice. I hurried to the lab, my heart racing, my breath catching in my throat. She handed me a printed report, its pages crisp and white, and pointed to a line in bold, capitalized text. "Barbiturate. High concentration. It's a sedative," she clarified, her voice calm. "This dosage would be sufficient to induce unconsciousness and quite possibly death, if not treated promptly. It's highly unusual to find this in a beverage meant for consumption." I stood frozen, the report trembling slightly in my grasp, the words blurring before my eyes. Barbiturate, not an overindulgence in alcohol, not a sudden, random illness. Someone had intentionally poisoned my drink, and there was no doubt in my mind who it was. I looked at the technician, managing to keep my voice even despite the internal earthquake. "Thank you. Please don't share this with anyone." She nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy, understanding more than she let on. On the drive back, I drove aimlessly around the city, the familiar streets and buildings passing by in a blur, my thoughts in a chaotic turmoil. My father, the man who had raised me, the man I had tried so hard to please despite his coldness. Why? The question screamed in my head, and then it hit me with the force of a physical blow. My fortune, $5 million. No wife, no children. If I were to die, my father would be my legal heir, the sole recipient of everything I had built. The realization was like a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut, cutting through any remaining illusions. He didn't just want to control my money. He wanted me out of the picture entirely, a final, definitive solution to his financial woes. I parked my car by the riverfront, the dark, turbulent water flowing relentlessly by. A cold, biting wind whipped around me, rattling the branches of the bare trees. But I felt nothing but the raw, burning rage within, a searing inferno of betrayal. My father had attempted to murder me, not once, but twice. If I hadn't made that split-second, desperate decision at Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be standing here, watching the river, planning my next move. I gripped the lab report in my hand, the paper crinkling under the pressure, my resolve hardening into a cold, unbreakable steel. I had to confront him, not for vengeance, not truly, but so that my mother and I could finally be free from his manipulation, his darkness, his lethal greed. My father was released from the hospital a week later, looking frail and considerably thinner, but his eyes, when he looked at me, were as sharp and calculating as ever. My mother, desperate for a semblance of normalcy, asked me to visit, but I knew this would be no ordinary social call, no attempt at reconciliation. I brought the lab report with me, tucked inside my coat like a shield, a silent weapon. As I walked into the old house, the familiar scent of old wood and my mother's baking filling the air, I saw her in the kitchen, her back to me, making tea, seemingly oblivious to the storm about to break. "Liam, you're here," she said with a soft smile, though her eyes, when she turned, betrayed her lingering sadness and exhaustion. "Your father is in the living room. He's been asking for you." I nodded, took a centering breath that felt like drawing cold steel into my lungs, and walked in. My father was in his usual armchair by the fireplace, holding a glass of wine. Always wine. He looked up at me, that familiar dismissive smirk playing on his lips, a pathetic attempt at superiority. "Liam, come to see your old man? How thoughtful." His tone was light, dismissive, but I could hear the underlying fatigue, the strain in his voice. "I need to speak with you." In private, I said, my voice firm, allowing no room for argument. My mother was still in the kitchen, safely out of earshot. He arched an eyebrow, a gesture of feigned annoyance, and gestured to the empty chair opposite him. I remained standing, towering over him. Instead, I produced the lab report, its stark print starkly visible, placing it firmly on the coffee table before him, pushing it closer until it almost touched his wine glass. "Barbiturate," I stated, my voice low and controlled, locking my gaze with his. "In the wine you served me at Thanksgiving. A lethal dose." "Explain." His face went rigid, all color draining from it. But he quickly tried to regain his composure, to rebuild his crumbling facade. "What are you talking about, Liam? Poison? You're being delusional. That's absurd." He let out a brittle, forced laugh, but it was hollow and couldn't conceal the dawning terror in his eyes, mirroring the panic I'd seen when he collapsed. "Don't lie," I said, my voice as cold as ice, cutting through his pretense. "I switched our glasses. That's why you collapsed, not me. I have the proof. The lab confirmed everything. If you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm taking this to the police. They'll have a forensic team here within the hour." An oppressive, suffocating silence filled the room, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock and my father's ragged, shallow breathing. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with years of resentment and betrayal. Then, like a dam finally breaking under immense pressure, he crumbled. He slumped deeper into his armchair, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking. "Liam, forgive me," he whispered, his voice cracking, barely audible, utterly devoid of its usual arrogance. I only wanted to knock you out. I was going to forge a will, take the money. I'm in so much debt, Liam. I saw no other way." I stood there, staring down at the man who was supposed to be my father, now just a pathetic, desperate shell of a man, his confession a bitter torrent of self-pity. His admission was a blade to the heart, but strangely, I felt not anger, not vengeance, but a profound and heavy sadness, a deep, aching emptiness. "Why, Dad?" I asked, my voice hoarse, filled with an unbearable grief. "I'm your son. Why me?" He offered no response, only hung his head, silent tears streaming down his face, though I doubted their sincerity. I thought of my mother, of the decades she had spent living with a man capable of this, her endless loyalty, her quiet sacrifices. I wanted to call the authorities immediately, to make him pay for what he'd done, for the terror he'd inflicted, but I knew the scandal, the public humiliation, would shatter her irrevocably. "I won't go to the police," I said, my voice trembling with the effort of holding back the storm within me. "But from this day forward, you will stay away from me. You will never, ever contact me again, and you will never, ever go near Mom again. Do you understand?" I turned and walked out, leaving him alone in that cold, dark room, a defeated, broken figure. As I stepped into the hall, my own body trembling with adrenaline and emotion, I saw my mother standing by the kitchen doorway, her hands gripping the doorframe so tightly her knuckles were white, her face ashen, her eyes red and overflowing with tears. She had been there. She had heard it all. The accusation, my father's admission, the chilling motive, every agonizing word. I went to her and wrapped her in a hug, feeling her small, frail frame shake uncontrollably within my arms. "Liam, I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs, as if she were the one to blame, as if she had somehow failed me. "I never knew that Arthur could." She couldn't finish the sentence, the implications too horrifying to articulate. I guided her out to the backyard garden, where the decorative lanterns from her birthday still hung, their light now faint and melancholic in the twilight. We sat together on the old wooden bench, the silence between us filled only by the sound of the wind whispering through the trees and her quiet, broken sobs. I held her hand, giving her time to compose herself, to find her words. Finally, she took a deep, shuddering breath, her voice gaining a new, fragile firmness. "Liam, I heard what was said, what your father admitted. I can't process it, it's too much." She squeezed my hand tightly. "But there is something I must tell you, something I've kept hidden, even from myself, for decades." She met my gaze, her eyes a mixture of profound anguish and a newfound, chilling strength. "The symptoms you described, the ones from my birthday, they were identical to how my own father was. My wonderful father. He also collapsed after an evening of drinking with Arthur." Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the rustling leaves, as she gathered the courage to voice the unthinkable, the thought she had suppressed for so long. "My father passed away shortly after. Everyone claimed it was a heart attack, the doctors, the family. But I always felt something was wrong, Liam. He was so healthy, so vibrant, no history of illness, no warning signs. And after he was gone, Arthur inherited almost all of my family's fortune. My father had trusted him with his finances, and then he was gone. My blood ran cold, a horrifying realization dawning on me. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. You think Dad was involved in Grandfather's death? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question tearing at the fabric of our family's history. She nodded, tears finally spilling freely down her ashen cheeks, silent testimony to her long-held agony. I didn't want to believe it, Liam. I love your father. I truly did. I wanted to see the good in him, to believe his reassurances. But now I fear I've been sharing my life with a monster. And I was too blind, too trusting to see it. Her words were like an icy gust of wind, blowing away any lingering illusions I had about Arthur, about our family, about the very nature of evil. I pulled her closer, wrapping her in my arms, her pain becoming my own, shared and amplified. Mom, if you're right, we have to uncover the truth, I urged, my voice resolute, strengthened by a cold anger. Not just for me, but for Grandfather. And for you. He can't get away with this. Not again. She nodded, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand, her eyes now burning with a quiet, fierce determination. I will help you. Liam, whatever it takes, I need to know the truth. For my father. For us. We sat there under the pale moonlight, a mother and son forged into allies by a battle neither of us had ever anticipated, bound by a shared horror and a common purpose. I knew the path ahead would be agonizing, fraught with painful revelations, but I was no longer consumed by fear. With my mother at my side, I felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, to finally bring the truth to light. The following day, my mother and I embarked on our grim search for the truth. We operated with few words, like two soldiers on a silent, somber mission, each movement deliberate, each glance conveying volumes. I proposed we start with the large, imposing safe in my father's study, where he meticulously stored his most critical documents. My mother agreed without hesitation, though I saw her hand tremble slightly as she opened the heavy oak door to a room she had long avoided, a place Arthur had considered his private domain. I haven't been in here for years, she said softly, her voice echoing in the quiet space. Arthur never liked me touching his things, especially his papers. The safe itself was a cold, steel monolith in the corner, an impenetrable fortress until now. My mother, ironically, knew the combination by heart, their wedding anniversary, a date now imbued with a terrible irony. Inside, we discovered stacks of old real estate deeds, intricate contracts, and tucked away at the very bottom, a worn, leather-bound notebook. This was my father's journal. My mother breathed, her hand shaking as she carefully turned the brittle, yellowed pages. My grandfather's elegant, sloping script filled the notebook, detailing his final days, his business dealings, and his personal reflections. One particular entry made us both stop cold, a chilling prophecy from beyond the grave. November 12th. Arthur is behaving strangely. Last night, after a glass of wine, I felt dizzy and short of breath, just as Liam did. He has been pushing me hard on the new land deal, insisting I sign everything over. I suspect he wishes me harm. If anything should happen to me, investigate. My mother and I exchanged a speechless, horrified glance. It was a message from beyond the grave, confirming our deepest, most terrifying fears. Mom, we need professional help, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. I immediately got in touch with a private investigator, a Mr. Davies, who had assisted a friend with a complex legal matter years ago. He was known for his discretion and relentless thoroughness. I also retained a lawyer, Olivia Hayes, a sharp, formidable woman who specialized in complex criminal cases and had a reputation for fearlessly pursuing justice. They both agreed to meet us, sensing the gravity of our fragmented story. Davies suggested we start by exhuming my grandfather's body to re-examine the autopsy records. If poison was used, traces might still be detectable, even after all this time, he explained, his voice calm and pragmatic. With Olivia's formidable legal assistance, we secured a court order, navigating the emotional and bureaucratic hurdles. The exhumation was a grim, somber process, carried out under a leaden sky, but the results were devastatingly conclusive. The new forensic report, obtained through meticulous analysis, showed that my grandfather had indeed been poisoned by a sedative from the same chemical family as barbiturates, a substance remarkably similar to what was found in the wine Arthur had given me. It was not a heart attack. It was not natural causes. It was murder. We delved deeper, driven by a renewed, burning resolve. Davies, with his quiet persistence, uncovered a web of forged documents related to my father's inheritance of my grandfather's estate, including mismatched signatures, irregular asset transfers, and suspicious debts that were suddenly cleared after my grandfather's death. Each new piece of evidence was another stone in the towering wall of guilt being built around my father, a testament to his cold, calculated criminality. My mother sat beside me as we reviewed each document, her expression hardening with every shocking page, her grief slowly morphing into a quiet fury. "I lived with this man for over 30 years, she said, her voice cracking with disbelief and pain. "And I knew nothing, Liam. He deceived both of us so completely." I took her trembling hand, offering silent solace. "It's not your fault, Mom. He was a master manipulator. He deceived both of us and countless others." But I saw a new fire ignite in her eyes, not of raw, debilitating grief, but of steely resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a mother and a daughter demanding justice, unwavering in her pursuit of the truth. My mother did not waver. "I will sue him," she declared, her voice as steady as steel, echoing with newfound strength. "Not just for what he did to you, for trying to murder his own son, but for my father. Arthur must be held accountable for everything." Working closely with Olivia and Davies, we painstakingly compiled our case. The file grew thick with irrefutable evidence. The lab report from the wine I had switched, clearly showing the barbiturate. My grandfather's prophetic journal entry, meticulously dated. The new, conclusive autopsy findings, and the irrefutable proof of fraudulent documents used to seize the family estate. Each page was a dagger aimed at my father's carefully constructed life of deceit. The trial was held on a gray, rain-slicked day, the sky mirroring the somber mood in the courtroom. I sat next to my mother, holding her cold, trembling hand, her strength now leaning on mine. My father stood in the dock, no longer the imposing, distinguished figure I had once known. He looked old and defeated, his face pale and haggard, his eyes hollow. Yet even then, in the face of overwhelming evidence, he still attempted to deny everything, clinging to his lies. "I didn't do anything," he claimed, his voice weak and reedy, a pathetic shadow of its former power. But the evidence was irrefutable, meticulously gathered, leaving no room for doubt. Olivia methodically presented every damning detail. The wine tainted with barbiturates, the clear intent to murder me through a precisely planned poisoning. My grandfather's prophetic journal entry, written in his own hand, detailing his suspicions, the new forensic proof of his poisoning, and the irrefutable fraudulent documents used to seize the family estate. The prosecution then called my mother to the stand. She stood tall, her silver hair gleaming under the courtroom lights, her voice clear and unwavering as she recounted the decades of living with a manipulative and murderous husband and the soul-crushing agony of discovering he had killed her own father for greed. I watched her, my heart swelling with a mixture of immense pride and profound sorrow. My father, in the dock, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from her unwavering gaze. He stood no chance. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning a verdict: guilty. Attempted murder for my case and first-degree murder for my grandfather's. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his reign of terror finally over. As he was escorted out of the courtroom by officers, his wrists cuffed, he glanced back at my mother and me, his eyes devoid of any emotion, a blank, chilling stare that revealed the true emptiness within him. I felt no victory, no elation, only the profound emptiness where our family used to be, a void filled with the echoes of betrayal. After the trial, my mother came to live with me in Denver. The old house in Portland, once a symbol of family, now a place of painful memories, was sold, a symbolic closing of a long, painful chapter. In her new life, free from the crushing shadow of my father's manipulation and deceit, my mother began, slowly, to find peace. She took up gardening again, cultivating rows of vibrant lavender, its soothing scent a constant presence in my condo. Every afternoon, we would sit together on the balcony, drinking tea and discussing simple, everyday things, finding comfort in the mundane, healing in the quiet moments. I watched her smile return, a genuine, warm light, though it was now tinged with a permanent sadness, a reminder of the irreparable damage. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked her one evening, as the setting sun painted the garden in golden hues, casting long shadows. She nodded, squeezing my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "I'm okay, Liam. Justice was done. My father can finally rest, and you are safe. That's all that matters to me now." I found my own version of peace as well, a quiet equilibrium, even though the deep, psychological scars left by my father would likely never fade completely. I continued with my own life, managing my investments, exploring new interests, but now I live with a deeper purpose, living for my mother and for the quiet, precious moments we shared in the glow of the setting sun, a new, stronger family built on truth and resilience. I knew that, together, we had finally stepped out of the darkness, into a fragile but enduring light.